So we're back at it, the second video. We're going to talk about how much protein, carb, fats, and what type. The Hunter method that we're going to use, my morning routine. We're going to take the Trojans off the table, and we're also going to explore what the 7 accelerators to inappropriate upregulation of the aromatase enzyme, which takes your testosterone and turns it into estrogen. On the previous video, we kind of talked about the system, God love them. Over time, they tank all of these powerful VA hormones and they kind of start to push up this one, which keeps it permanently down. And the Trojans right here in phase 3, which we're going to talk about today, is the biggest culprit for that. And we can also, we'll talk about the boosters here as well. You know, supplements, I used to use them, and I'll talk about what I'm doing today. Then also the other things that can really accelerate fat loss and put on the muscle at the same time. So what we have to think about is we have to switch. Clearly, the paradigm shift is from what the system has taught us for a very long time. And think about it like this. If you've got a V8 supercar, where are you going to take your V8 engine? To the same mechanic that tunes up Miss Daisy's 4-cylinder, or are you going to take it to a V8 specialist? So that's why we work with functional doctors and experts in hormones, genetics. So we've got to take off the table the Trojans. We're going to discuss how we're going to do that today, and also increase the performance and be able to slap a supercharger inside your body there. So that's what the scope of today is all about. And one of the biggest problems that I unpacked on the previous videos is that we're not hitting all of our targets, so we power down. So we've got to think about vitamins, minerals, electrolytes, which are kind of the same thing, immune support, antioxidant support, which is huge, and metabolism support. And the Hunter method, and I'm going to show you how to put this together so we can move away from this physiology to that physiology. And this is kind of how we think about it. Over 2 to 3 weeks, we'll be tracking things just to find out where we lack in our body. And then we use something that I've put together called plate design. And I'll talk about that as we'll get towards the end. Now, what we have to understand is that over years and decades, we're exposed to these chemicals. And as I learned from Dr. J, who did his 5-year PhD on hormones, and he wrote the book called Estrogeneration, a lot of these chemicals that we're exposed to are estrogen-like. And there comes a point that instead of eliminating these chemicals, as we should, they start to become stored in our tissues, organs, and fat cells. So what we want to do is completely fix that so we're eliminating them faster than they can be potentially stored in our body. And I've got 2 videos here that I'll play. So this is what I call a fat reset. We have to get to a place where we've detoxed the chemicals out of our body, and importantly, we're eliminating them instead of storing them in the future. And to just examine why that's absolutely fucking huge. When I first met Dr. J, this is what he said about these chemicals and how they can cause weight loss, plateaus, and crush us, including our testosterone, when we're trying to drop body fat.
Stored in your fat cells.
Oh, yeah. All of them. A lot of them.
All of them. All right. So let me just create this scenario. So you've decided that you want to lose weight, and you've decided to do that. You start losing a bit of body fat, and all these estrogens are liberated into the fat cells. And I saw a research paper that you showed that some human fat cells have got, I think, 16,000, is that right, nanograms in the fat cells.
Oh, yeah.
So basically, you're flooding your blood with all this estrogen. What's going to happen then? Testosterone, free testosterone goes down. So your brain doesn't work properly. It's like, you lose your will to do the diet, and it makes muscle preservation harder. It makes fat loss harder. It makes everything harder. And you're fighting this, trying to lose weight, and you've got all these estrogens being flooded into the system. Is that a fair call?
Oh yeah, you got it exactly. I mean, I can tell you read the book carefully. I appreciate that, and that's a huge epiphany, even for me when I was kind of going through this process and learning about this, writing the book, and the average life of a fat cell is 1.5 years, which they've discovered from these atomic bomb studies. Where people got exposed to radiation, but they found fat cells that can survive in your body 10 years. And so if you're loading up these fat cells with all these estrogen chemicals, and so if you're loading the fat cells with estrogen chemicals, those chemicals are sitting in the cell saying, hey, hang on to fat, don't get rid of fat, right? So on top of all this problems with demotivation, with empathy, all that stuff you talked about with lower testosterone, which is true, then the fat cells also don't want to get rid of the fat. And then even if they do, they're, it's dumping more of this blood, and it's just a vicious cycle. So it causes a lot of weight gain plateaus. And that's where the sauna actually comes in. People look for practical ideas to accelerate this.
So there's a few steps that we have to put in place to make sure that when these chemicals are coming out, they're not causing downstream issues to lower testosterone, inhibit fat loss, and muscle growth. Now, there's a second thing that can certainly play into it, and that's your genetics when it comes to estrogen. And I'm also going to give you the steps here to make sure that you've got the good balance of testosterone to estrogen, because that, my friends, is pretty huge. So listen.
Good testosterone genes. Bad estrogen genes, though.
Okay.
So
wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So this is another one of those sections. Estrogen is a hot spot, and gut section is a hot spot here. So this is another reason it's tough to put on muscle mass. It's tough to bulk up, because he's fighting a lot of estrogen, and most of these genes basically say, he's got more estrogen receptors.
Yeah.
And
a little bit of estrogen goes a long, long way.
Yeah. So he's going to want to work to get that down. He might even take calcium D-glucarate as a supplement. I've added that to my report now.
So there's definitely some things you can do there. We've also done about 160 people now, and probably just over 20% have that issue. Now, you can go on aromatase blockers, but I wouldn't recommend that because you need estrogen at healthy levels. But there's ways that we can power down that aromatase enzyme, and that's going to be key. And we found 17 accelerators to that will take your testosterone and aromatize it into estrogen. So we need to power down that. So we have to take those 17 accelerators of aromatase off the table. That's one key step. Now, as you can imagine, we're exposed to a lot of chemicals, and a lot of them cause insulin resistance in and of themselves. So I've got more information about our comprehensive elimination plan below, but they're basically everywhere. We have to get rid of it. If you think about the total daily load, what's going to happen is that you just can't eliminate them, so they're being stored in your tissues, organs, and fat cells. So we have to take the large majority out of our whole day, but also make sure that we can get rid of these chemicals, and they're no joke. And the scientific literature is thick with these chemicals, and they have terrible downstream effects on fat loss, muscle growth, brain function. Because they're estrogenic, they mimic estrogen, and they're anti-androgenic, which means they lower testosterone and they screw up your thyroid hormone. So pretty big deal. And another big problem that we've discovered on our journey is that, even just the personal care products at low dose, you've got a complete suppression of dihydrotestosterone. So you've got two forms of testosterone, or many more, but the main ones are testosterone that goes down this pathway that's converting to dihydrotestosterone. And the thing about dihydrotestosterone is that it has a 2 to 5 times higher binding affinity to the androgen receptor. And number 2, it is 10-fold higher potency at inducing androgen receptor function. So it's more powerful than testosterone. So we certainly don't want to limit that hormone. So testosterone is going to do a lot of things. So testosterone here can go to estrogen, which we don't want. Remember those 17 accelerators that makes that happen? We're going to take those off the table. And then it can go into the brain to lower fear and anxiety and increase courage, motivation, and just get things done. Or it can go down here to dihydro, build muscle and burn body fat. And again, it's 10 times more potent than testosterone. So a little bit goes a long, long way. So we're going to explore the Hunter method here, and it's really simple. But basically, big food, as I talked about in the previous video there, their food is nutrient void and it's packed full of chemicals, preservatives, additives, and also advanced glycation and lip oxidization end products in food. So it causes a lot of inflammation, 50 times more free radicals, endocrine disorders, which is disrupting all of your hormones, pulmonary disorders like asthma and allergies. Then you've got arthritis, then you've got atherosclerosis, which is heart disease, oxidative stress, lipid peroxidation. And pesticides, my friends, are no joke. What you see on screen there is how testosterone is created in the testes, the ball sack. So you can see here that the scientific literature has even got a skull and crossbone there. They're toxic. They're toxic. So basically what you've got here, exposure to pesticides interfere with testosterone synthesis cascade by downregulating cyclic AMP right here, and protein kinase A levels as well by suppressing the expression of steroidogenic genes that leads to ROS, which is oxidative stress in the testes and also the penis and other organs. And this is my friend, Dr. Amy B. Keelan. She's an MD doctor, and she's just speaking about something that's pretty important for the bedroom. Listen.
So this is called venous leak, CVOD, but it's not a vein problem. It's actually a problem with the cells inside the corpora cavernosa. These cells, these smooth muscle cells, are the problem. Now, what causes these cells to die? Oxidative stress of some sort. So things that cause inflammation and oxidative stress can increase the death of these cells. So that could be just age, but it also could be poor lifestyle choices. It could be diabetes or high blood pressure. It could be a high sugar diet. It could be not exercising. Also, low testosterone over time could do that. So anything that causes these cells within the penis to die is going to compromise your ability to maintain an erection, because those veins don't get clamped off properly against the tunica albuginea when you have a partial erection.
Okay, so that's pesticides and chemicals, and this food here, it isn't good for men. Now, how do you start to rebuild the ball sack and also, your manhood there? Well, growth hormone comes to the rescue. Number one, it potently stimulates the release of free fatty acid from adipose tissue, which is your fat cells, so you get the abs. Number two, it potently stimulates protein synthesis alongside testosterone and dihydrotestosterone. But importantly, it rejuvenates the tissues and organs. So we're talking about the brain, the heart, the blood vessels, the testes, the ovaries if you're a lady, the intestines and gut, the kidneys, the muscle, including the smooth muscle of the penis. Yeah. So we've got the cartilage and bone marrow, liver, and central nervous system. So one of the biggest Trojan horses for limited amounts of growth hormone to rejuvenate the tissues and organs there. So when you've got glucose up too high, it inhibits growth hormone release, and also insulin will do the same thing as well. And we talked about that on the previous video there. So that's why insulin resistance, we have to walk that back. And we're going to talk about how to achieve that towards the end. Now, one big thing that the system tells us to do is basically eat a lot of these foods here. As you can see, the overall nutrient density is low. Right. When I first spoke to Dr. Ken Berry, board certified MD, this really resonated with me. Listen to this, my friends.
The untrue story that eating a slave diet is the healthiest diet for a human being. Eating a plant-based diet, that's exactly the diet that the Roman emperors fed their subjects to keep them from revolting. That they had a full belly, they didn't starve to death, but they had no motivation. They had no mental inquisitiveness or ingenuity. And so they were easy to keep down.
So basically, that's what they've got in line for us with that pyramid thing, you know what I mean? And they tell us not to eat a lot of these foods here. Overall nutrient density, as you can see, very high. So we're talking about all of these things here. Now, there's a big problem, and I'll speak about this as we progress, because if you've got too much vitamins and minerals, but also iron, you've got iron overload, that's a big problem. So we've got to be very careful about our blood labs. We have to get our blood labs into optimal range. Now, when it comes to a lot of vegetables, for me, they don't mesh with me. My genetics doesn't like a lot of vegetables, especially dark leafy greens. And the same is true for Dr. J. Listen to the conversation that we had a little while back.
Leafy greens screw me up.
Me too, man. That's what I was just going to say. I've been wearing a CGM, a continuous glucose monitor.
Yep.
And even when I eat just like a leafy green salad with 0 carbs, it spikes my blood sugar.
Is that inflammation?
Yeah, it's like your body's going into fight or flight. Yeah.
Yep. Holy shit. That is so important.
I know.
The same thing happens to me. Yeah.
Mark, I can, just for the experimental sake, I bought some Coca-Cola and some other bullshit stuff just to try it. I literally get more blood sugar spike from a small leafy green salad with nothing on it than I get from a can of Coca-Cola.
That's incredible. Like I'm the same. I've checked.
Yeah. So, not everybody can eat certain foods, and that's the point. We've got all these food sensitivities, and we'll explore how to identify that as we progress. Now, your health is paramount. You've got to look after your health clearly. So if you've got the iron overload, it's a big, big problem. It can affect a lot of different tissues and organ systems. Listen to this video right here.
Iron is referred to non-transferrin bound iron. And when this happens, cells will take up this non-transferrin bound iron into the liver, for example, the heart, the pituitary glands, the joints, the pancreas, as well as the gonads. And here they undergo biochemical reactions, which creates reactive oxygen species, which in turn causes tissue damage, inflammation, and fibrosis. So for example, in the liver, it can cause cirrhosis. As well, it increases the risk of hepatocellular carcinoma. In the heart, it can cause restrictive or dilated cardiomyopathy as well as arrhythmia. In the joints, it causes arthritis. In the pituitary glands, when you have iron depositing here, it can cause secondary hypothyroidism or secondary hypogonadism. In the pancreas, the deposition of iron can cause diabetes mellitus. In the gonads, it can cause testicular atrophy, amongst many other things.
So it's affecting a lot of different organ systems. It can cause primary and secondary hypogonadism, sexual function, and it's going to take your testosterone. So how do you solve that problem? Well, you donate blood. And if you've got a hemochromatosis risk genetically, like I have, then you really need to be on top of this. Now, this is where it comes back to standard labs versus functional labs. A standard lab will say between 30 and up to 400 is okay. But what does the functional medicine say? Well, around about 50 to 100, and this is for ferritin. And you certainly should get a more comprehensive panel than just ferritin, but it is huge. You've got to make sure that you don't have iron overload, because as you can see here from the scientific literature, impotence correlated with a 50% reduction in plasma testosterone, resulting in 63% decrease in testosterone production, testicular atrophy. So you can see what's going on here. And it also causes insulin resistance all by itself. Now, and to add insult to injury, if you've got another gene, and we'll fix this gene as we progress here, called superoxide dismutase 2, which needs a manganese attached to it to work, this is what can happen.
Heart disease. Yeah. So this one gene, there's really the two genes here, but the SOD2 gene is not a risk unless her ferritin is high. But if her ferritin is high, this gene gives her a 10-fold higher risk of heart disease, which is super high risk.
Tenfold, yeah.
We want that to be 0-fold. So you got to make sure the ferritin is between 50 and 100, not just 50 to 500 or some kind of crazy nonsense.
Yeah.
Has to be optimal, not just normal in this one.
So you got to make sure that you don't have iron overload. You might be thinking, well, it's just, meat products. Our food is fortified. Big food are made by the government to fortify it with iron. So you can actually get iron overload from eating cereals and things like that. So that's super important, as you can see. Now, we're just going to talk about two things as we progress now. Now, vitamin and mineral status, it's not just magnesium, it's all of them. And we'll explore how to put this all together towards the end there. Now, when you don't have enough magnesium, we've got a lot of different problems, but none more important than energy. So when you make energy, you have to activate the ATP, just like this match releases energy here. So what happens is a magnesium cleaves off one of these phosphates here, and just like a match, you create energy. Now, if you don't have adequate magnesium, the body's not stupid. It's going to store it as fat for a rainy day. And they've also shown in the scientific literature that low serum magnesium also causes insulin resistance. And if you don't have enough magnesium, you'll have low bioavailable free T. So that's pretty huge. And a couple of other things that magnesium is very key for is DNA repair, number one. And number two, it is needed to create DNA bases to repair the DNA in the first place. So let's just say you go out into the sun and you get a double-strand break, or you have oxidative stress that damages the DNA. 24 hours later, you've repaired it. No harm, no foul. If you have low magnesium, that double-strand break mightn't be fully repaired, so you've got an incomplete repair. So as you can see, magnesium is pretty key, and here's just 14 things that it's responsible for out of about 300 plus. So it's like a mission critical jobs, right? We have to make sure that we've got adequate vitamins and minerals, not just magnesium. So we're talking testosterone, energy, muscle function, nerve operations. We've also got antioxidant defenses, DNA, as you now know, electrolyte balance, heart health. So it maintains a good rhythm and blood pressure, protein synthesis to build muscle, glucose and insulin regulation, neurotransmitter release. You've also got mood regulation, immune support, and learning and memory. And another couple of big players is vitamin D, which is a steroid hormone. It's not even a vitamin. And we've also got vitamin A, which is retinol. So as you can see, we've got to make sure we've got adequate vitamin and mineral status. So we just can't second guess this. We have to get it right. Now, let's just talk about protein and fats for a moment. As I spoke about in the previous video, this omega-3 index is pretty huge, and there should be information below about getting yours tested. Now, the system says to have a low protein diet and a low fat diet. Now, is that ideal for optimal human health? Well, as you can see, the scientific literature is thick with this. A low protein diet causes significant reductions in body weight. So there goes your muscle mass, your testes shrink, the epidermis and seminal vesicle weight, and testosterone tanks. And the same is true when you've got a low fat diet, even when controlling for comorbidities, age, body mass index, and activity level. So we've got to make sure we've got optimal fats and proteins. And this is a little while back when I spoke to Dr. Ken Berry about it. And listen to this.
Then we could work out a solution quite easily to fix this problem. I mean, look at COVID this year. I mean, all these, it's a classic example of exactly what you just explained.
Yeah. And there's a subset of the population in the low carb sphere who believe that the government understands everything you and I just said about cholesterol
and that they actually like it for men and women to have a very low testosterone level,
Yeah.
because when your T's low, you tend to just roll over and take it, don't you?
That's it.
Could you imagine trying to govern a population that had optimized testosterone levels, and you were trying to, in some way, force them to do something they didn't want to do, or force them to do something that was just wrong? That would not go well for you if you were the government.
No.
So basically, the low-fat diet, the low-protein diet, nutrient-poor foods, all of that, the chemicals, the highly processed foods, it's just crushing us, absolutely crushing us. Now, if you want a high-functioning brain, we'll talk about how much protein as well. I'm going to give you insights to get this right, how much protein, carb, and fat. If you want a highly functioning brain, we've got to make sure we've got adequate serotonin. And if you want to sleep, we've got to make sure we've got adequate melatonin. And you might be surprised to learn that that whole process requires adequate protein. So point number one here, we take tryptophan down this pathway, and it's converted into serotonin here. Right there, serotonin, but it needs all these vitamins and minerals like folate, calcium, magnesium, B3, vitamin C. Now, point number two here is we need this metabolite that our body makes. It's called SAMe. And that is converted in a pathway called methylation. Now, the important thing to understand about methylation is you need adequate protein. And if you've got this gene SNP here, if you don't eat a lot of meat, you need to supplement about 1,000 milligrams of methionine, the amino acid, per day, to make sure that this pathway right here is working. So let me walk you through these 5 points. So this is a pathway in your body. You don't have to know this at all, but we have to understand why we need adequate amino acids, namely proteins, of course. So number one here, as I mentioned, methionine is an amino acid that keeps this pathway turning. So imagine if you're not getting a lot of protein and methionine, this pathway slows down. And that's not good. The second thing over here is if you've got a sick gut. So if you've got a candida overgrowth, what it's going to do is going to ferment glucose and allulose into ethanol. So ethanol's metabolite is over here, acetaldehyde, and that slows down that pathway again. And ethanol is alcohol. So if you drink a lot of alcohol, this all slows down to a crawl. Now, another important thing to understand is I guess this is where it goes back to the professional bodybuilders here. If you've got too much inflammation or testosterone, what happens is this pathway slows down. So you want to have optimal testosterone for you. So this is why if you've got way too much testosterone, that can be not a great thing. As you can see here, estrogen is inversely and testosterone is positively correlated to homocysteine concentration. So estrogen and testosterone balance is needed to have optimal homocysteine levels. Now, if you've got elevations in homocysteine and couple that to a really poor genetics for histone metabolism, that's a big problem, because this is what high homocysteine levels do. So as you can see here, you've got diabetes, kidney disease, cardiovascular disease, migraines, cancer, bone fracture, eye problems, cognitive decline, hearing loss, infertility, and depression. And the four biggest drivers of that is vitamin status, lifestyle, genetic mutations, and also drugs. So they're the biggest problems that we've identified for high homocysteine levels. And quite frankly, the biggest driver of high homocysteine levels is this. So this is a video of me, a client, and an expert in all of these pathways. And this is what he said.
Okay. Total testosterone now is at a high level. Free testosterone is kind of in the middle. It looks good where it's at. Kind of got to get your methylation up too, because that homocysteine level is at 18, and that means we don't have enough active B12 and folate on board. We get that. It's a marker for inflammation in the blood vessels, but it's also a marker that you're not methylating efficiently. You're not activating folate and B12 efficiently. Your C-reactive protein looked good. It's right where it should be. It's below 1. So I'm not as worried about the inflammatory part about it as the methylation part. That methylation.
Okay, so methylation, we just go back up here. When this pathway is turning efficiently, this homocysteine will be at healthy levels, but because that gentleman's not metabolizing the histamine correctly, it's up at an elevated position there. So the recommendation from the functional doctors is quite simply that the RDI of 400 for folate here isn't enough. He's increased the dose, and I won't say what that is because I don't want you to go and take this and just start running with it. It needs to be much higher than the 400 micrograms, and also B12. They've increased that quite substantially too, and they've also increased B6. And the reason for that is genetically, those B vitamins, he needs much more of them to keep that pathway turning of methylation to make sure everything is optimized. So that's a pretty big deal. Now, another thing that I want to point out, actually, I'll just show you here. This is where the vitamin and mineral status is huge. As you can see here, you need magnesium, you need zinc, you need SAMe, you need FAD, NAD, you need zinc again, you need magnesium. So you can see that we need adequate vitamin and mineral status. Here's another big problem. So if you've got erectile dysfunction, the big pharma or your doctor will put you on ED medications there, right? Now, the big problem with these ED medications, especially this one here and this one here, right there, is they will raise homocysteine levels. Holy shit. Now, tadalafil seems to be the most tolerated one. So if you are on those ED medications, you should probably swap it out for tadalafil. Now, this is huge, this one here. This study here, randomized control, after 18 weeks, there was an absolute 55% increase from baseline plasma homocysteine levels. So it went up when you're supplementing vitamin B3 niacin. So if you've got way too much vitamin B3, your homocysteine levels can go up. So you don't want it too high, you want it in the butter zone, you don't want it too low. So these are just some of the problems that you can encounter. One of our clients we didn't know was supplementing that, and his homocysteine wouldn't come down. So I got him to photograph everything that he was taking, and sure enough, that was there. So as you can see there, we were just like, what's going on here? And just something simple like that can throw your homocysteine levels off. So that's pretty huge. Now, another big problem that we see is if you don't have this enzyme, superoxide dismutase, fired up, right? It takes care of a lot of oxidative stress. So when we breathe, the mitochondria takes that oxygen and it turns it into usable energy and creates ATP within the mitochondria. However, it creates this toxic metabolite called superoxide. Now, superoxide dismutase takes care of it, and it needs a manganese, an Mg, to take care of that. So it takes that superoxide, turns it into hydrogen peroxide, and then catalase and glutathione turn it into harmless old water. So a beautiful and elegant system. So the problem becomes when you don't take care of superoxide. What happens is you can actually trigger apoptosis, cell death, and also necrosis, which isn't good, which can lead to all of this shit here. So we've spoken about that. And scientists call it the devil's triangle. So basically you've got your superoxide here, and it non-enzymatically works, it hits the nitric oxide. So we need nitric oxide, but if you don't have manganese to take care of business, nitric oxide and superoxide come together and they make, hang on a second, perinitrite here. And it's toxic. It causes apoptosis, cell death, damages cells. and it damages DNA, and it's really bad. So how do we solve this problem? Well, superoxide dismutase 2 requires manganese. Now, I think about this simply. I just look at some of the foods that contain a lot of these vitamins and minerals, and ginger, it's a superpower because about, probably 4 grams of ginger powder there, you've just about got your daily dose. And ginger, look what else ginger does. A lot of research behind ginger: antioxidant activity, anti-inflammatory, anti-obese, anti-nausea, cardiovascular protection, protection from respiratory disorders like asthma and allergies, neuroprotection, protecting your brain, anti-diabetic activities, helping normalize insulin and glucose, anti-cancer, antimicrobial activity. And we're not done yet. Ginger is very powerful at creating a lot of nitric oxide, right? Nitric oxide. So think about that. If the nitric oxide and superoxide go together, it creates that perinitrate, which is toxic. And the ginger solves that problem because it's got a manganese that attaches to the superoxide dismutase, which takes care of business. And another powerful thing that ginger does, you've got this thing called 6-gingerol in there, which is a potent bioactive compound in ginger. It is able to stimulate cyclic GMP here and produce nitric oxide. So you're taking the ginger, you've got good vasodilation, you've got the manganese to take care of the oxidative stress with superoxide dismutase, and it's also going to give you much more testosterone. So it is like a superpower. So every single day I'm making sure I just get a little bit of ginger, and it's got all of those benefits. I mean, wow. Ginger is a bit of a superpower. Now, as I mentioned there, we've got to have adequate vitamin and mineral status and proteins to keep all these pathways working. Now, if you've got, I'll just go here. So in that whole methylation pathway, there's another pathway which attaches to it called transsulfuration. And if you've got high homocysteine, guess what you'll have? You'll have low glutathione, the master antioxidant. So high homocysteine, low glutathione, and look at all the serious health consequences of that. So you've got neuro and brain, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, Huntington's, you've got ALS, migraines, multiple sclerosis, autism, ADHD, ADD, bipolar depression, cardiovascular. You've got stroke, hypertension, erectile dysfunction, angina, atherosclerosis, heart disease, then you've got immune and cancer, lupus, all these cancers here, viral infections, asthma, acne, Lyme disease, allergies, gingivitis, arthritis, and your thyroid and pancreas tap out, so you don't have a good metabolism or testosterone. And you've also got insulin resistance, then other problems that we've got, inflammatory skin conditions, accelerated aging, nobody wants that, arthritis, chronic fatigue, we're tired, pulmonary disorders, gout, hepatitis, cystic fibrosis, infertility, your eyes, and gastric ulcers. And guess what glutathione is? It's a protein. It's got 3 amino acids. So if you've got low protein, you'll also have low glutathione. So the whole point of what I'm trying to illustrate here is if you want to be at your peak, you can't have too many vitamins and minerals, excess, and you can't have too little, lack. So we're piecing this together as we go. Now, one of the most important things you've got to have for methylation is a healthy liver. So the liver does a lot of amazing things, but it gets rid of toxins and pollutants, contaminants, chemicals, drugs, big pharma drugs, alcohol, food additives, because the body's got to get rid of those. They're no good for us. Metabolic end products and microorganisms. So it's doing a lot of heavy lifting, and it needs, I'll just move this here, phase 1 and phase 2 liver detox. But as you can see here, you need vitamins and minerals, antioxidants like superoxide dismutase, you need manganese, you need the B vitamins, glutathione. Sunshine also increases phase 1. Then you've got other things like milk thistle. And yes, ginger helps with phase 1 liver detox. Another great reason to put that into your daily regimen. And then the phase 2 over here, this is where it keeps estrogen at really healthy levels. But as you can see, I mean, you need glutamine, taurine, glycine, cysteine, methionine. You need sulfur and choline. You need all of those. And look what methylation does, right? So I'll just go through these 5 things. DNA methylation, gene regulation, detoxification. As you can see, phase 1, phase 2. The synthesis of neurotransmitters and also their metabolism, phosphatidylcholine synthesis, and I'll unpack why that's important shortly. Protein synthesis, the creation of carnitine for fat loss, hormonal regulation, energy, repair of DNA, viral suppression, mood and brain function, histamine metabolism, and of course, homocysteine metabolism. So as you can see there, we need to be methylating. It is huge. And a lot of people have problems with allergies and histamine. So what do? They use big pharma drugs. And as we learned on the previous video, a lot of those big pharma drugs bring down testosterone. So do you really think you lack big pharma drugs? Or maybe, just maybe, you lack a bit of methylation, which simply means adequate vitamin and mineral status, not too much and not too little. Now, let's just quickly unpack this important thing here called choline. So that's where you can get choline. And choline is super important for testosterone production. Why? Because choline turns into ACTH here, acetylcholine, which is a neurotransmitter that triggers the production of nitric oxide, which is critical for testosterone production. So as you can see here, it's rich in animal foods, and they tell us not to eat a lot of animal foods, and it's hardly any in plant foods whatsoever. And look what else choline does. It turns into phosphatidylcholine for liver health. So we're talking about it's used in the creation of bile salts, metabolism and excretion of excess cholesterol, bilirubins, electrolytes, water, the emulsification of fats so you can absorb good fats into your system, the neutralization of acids, and the excretion of drugs and toxins. So you can see how important having adequate choline is. All right, legends. So now we're going to start into the steps and we'll start putting this all together. But I hope you can see the importance of having adequate vitamin and mineral status. And genetically, we can be all a little bit different. And as I talked about previously there, like if you get too much niacin B3, that can raise your homocysteine levels. So if you're serious about your health and longevity, we've got to dial all of these in. We just can't, the analogy I give to the people that I help, it's like you're in a dark room with a dart, throwing it at a board, trying to get the bullseye. You've just got no clue. And that was what it was like for me for a lot of years until I started working with these experts in hormones, genes, and also blood labs from functional medicine. As we now know, we have to get the androgens in the up position. Hang on a second. So all of these hormones have to go in the up position, because if they're in a down position, we've got all of that shit to contend with. As we talked about on the previous video there, low testosterone, sexual and non-sexual symptoms, it's a mess. You got decreased energy, vitality, well-being, and motivation, diminished physical and work performance, decreased mood, feeling sad and blue, impaired cognition, increased sleepiness and fatigue. So what hope in hell have we got in kicking ass in life if that's the case? And we're on those ED medications for that shit, and we feel like a lazy loser. System's got a lot to answer for. So we've got to also optimize these hormones here, and we're going to speak about how to achieve that as we progress. Thyroid hormone is absolutely huge, because when you get it in the butter zone, again, so the body likes to be in the butter zone for a lot of things, including testosterone, not too high, not too low. thyroid hormone in the butter zone there. If it's too high, we're going to feel like shit, anxious, and it's just terrible. And too low, we're going to be sluggish. Need it in the butter zone there. So when you get thyroid in the butter zone, it increases amino acid uptake for protein synthesis. Glucose and insulin are better. Energy production, fat, your fat comes down. It lowers LDL receptors on the liver, so you've got a healthy cholesterol. It increases your metabolism and testosterone, to name a few. And the way that it increases testosterone is that T3, the active form of thyroid, puts more LH receptors on the testes. So LH here, which is the precursor that says make testosterone, it puts more doors on the testes. So testosterone rushes in and says, boys, let's make testosterone. The next thing that it will do is put increased numbers of steroidogenic enzymes in the pathway. So we're talking about all of these enzymes. So think about it. Thyroid hormone in the butter zone there is doing a lot of heavy lifting for a lot of different things, including optimal testosterone production. And the biggest thing that we see with tapped out thyroid is food sensitivities. So we'll talk about that a little bit too. Growth hormone, as I've just covered, it does amazing things for our body, rejuvenates the tissues and organs, fat loss, muscle growth. And the biggest problems with growth hormone is elevations in glucose and insulin. Another powerful hormone is called adiponectin. And there's a lot of ways that we can increase adiponectin, but one of the most powerful ways is when your T levels are up at the right levels. It actually increases adiponectin levels. So it's like a twofer. And you can also do intermittent fasting. So the longer you fast, and we'll talk about that, and how I use fasting, that increases adiponectin levels while you're fasting. And the final thing here is we've got to optimize estrogen, insulin, and cortisol levels. Because when you're all of those, as I've mentioned, if they're too high, your testosterone will be low. So that's problem one. And problem two is that all of your goddamn androgens, so we're talking testosterone, dihydrotestosterone, and DHEA, they go through aromatization and turn into estrogen, and you feel like shit. And there's a lot of things that are causing that, like if you've got too much omega-6, you've got leptin and insulin resistance. The chemicals do too. And there's 17 things that accelerate that, and we'll talk about that. So one of the easiest things you can do is get your omega-3 index checked and get it in the green, and they give you the recommendations to do that. There should be information in the caption about how to achieve that. And don't forget about muscle growth with more omega-3. So over here, you've got increased protein synthesis. Here's a couple of studies. And this one here, Chris McGlory, PhD, this is what he said in very recent clinical trials. Listen to this.
Smith, we found that in the omega-3 group, there was higher rates of protein synthesis in it, which would kind of, again, corroborate the mechanisms of action of omega-3s, which is to enhance the protein synthetic response to daily protein feeding.
Okay, so it's doing a lot of heavy lifting. Now, another important thing, if you want to drop the body fat and put on muscle, is putting on muscle, because that's going to increase your metabolism, so you're going to have accelerated fat loss. Now, this is how you build muscle. You have to trigger this protein synthesis cascade here called mTOR, mechanistic target of rapamycin. Now, when cortisol's up too high, and that can be your trigs as well, your inflammation and estrogen itself, basically, you see this red line here, this little thing there, that's saying, the scientific literature says it shuts down muscle growth. As we now know, cortisol, when it's too high, will aromatize testosterone and all of your androgens. So we've got to dial that in as well. And one of the most important things, I believe, is getting your blood labs in optimal ranges. So one of the functional doctors that we worked with and getting our genetics tested as well helped this gentleman fix a blood disorder he had for years and years. Listen.
Like everything is looking great. Like my platelets, look where I was. Like
Yeah.
My brain was blowing up over here.
Wow.
I think I went up to 600 at a point because I can't see this. Red blood cell count going up. Hemoglobin. I hadn't seen that in years, brother.
Yeah, excellent.
So for me, these are the main. These are the main
metrics.
My main metrics because I had a blood disorder, right? So
that's looking good.
This is like you're supposed to be cuckoo, and yeah, I was very cuckoo at that time.
Yeah, man.
RDW has to do a lot with
So as you can see there, with the help of the functional doctors, we can get you optimized, and that's the point. But we've also got to consider that the standard labs, they just don't cut it. If you're interested in peak human performance, longevity, and health, we've got to get these blood labs in optimal ranges. And we can't have too much or too little. It's got to be all specific for you. That's the point. Now, what about protein? How much protein? Well, this is from the scientific literature there. So if you're in energy balance and you're trying to put on muscle, they say that we should have between 1.6 grams per kilo per day or up to 2.2 grams per kilo per day. So that's a basic amount of protein, but it's not enough nuance, in my opinion. Then if you're in energy restriction, you need quite substantially more, 2.3 to 3.1 grams per kilo per day. So why, can too much protein be a problem? Yes, it can be. If you've got a polymorphism in the OTC gene, it can push your urea up. So how do you solve that problem, especially when you want to put on muscle? Listen to this.
Preferences are. And also the other thing is we don't know any danger. There's no, quote, upper limit that we've been able to establish of potential downfalls of protein. But then coming into
someone has a urea cycle disorder.
Exactly. Which most people don't.
No, but about somewhere around 8 or 9% of people have a polymorphism in the OTC gene, which is sort of a urea cycle disorder light. And it's possible that those people either need to limit their protein for optimal health, or that maybe they need some extra, citrulline or arginine or something to which turns on the urea cycle in order to counterbalance the other amino acids.
So that's Chris Masterjohn, PhD, nutritional scientist, and as he said there, arginine. So if you do have that polymorphism, and how do you know? We can get your genes tested, or you get your blood labs done to see where your urea is. Now, the caveat about getting your blood labs done and looking at your urea, if you are dehydrated, can be a false positive. It can push your urea up. So you want to make sure that you're fully hydrated when you get that test done. Now, as he said there, arginine or citrulline can help speed up and power up the urea cycle, which will bring your urea down. Now, animal proteins per 100 gram have only got about 2.5 grams of arginine. So the hack, I believe, is the most powerful thing you can do. This is collagen protein, and it's got per 100 grams close to 7 grams. So you've got a lot more arginine to lower the urea. Now, let's just have a look at how powerful collagen is. Now, this is an unsung hero. I'll just open up my database here. So let's have a look. Dr. James DiNicolantonio, he actually wrote a book about this, and I believe, again, it's an unsung hero. Now, collagen is the most abundant protein in your body. So why aren't we getting it? If it's a building material of our body, why aren't we getting this into our body? Because it makes up 30% of our protein, 70% of your skin. So if you want to age without wrinkles, it's absolutely paramount. And 80% of your bone is collagen. And there's 29 different types, and 90% of all those types are type 1, 2, and 3. Type 1, hair, skin, nail, bone, tendons, ligaments. So your joints don't feel achy and, terrible. Then type 2, cartilage. So you don't get hip replacements and knee replacements. And then I think one of the most important ones is type 3, your arteries. Yeah, your arteries and your intestines, gut health. So if you ask me, collagen is an unsung hero because it's doing everything you see on screen there. Plus, it's helping balance your urea when you're eating, a lot of protein. So my whole idea is that every single day, I want to get around 70% from animal proteins and about 30% from collagen. That way I'll stay youthful for a really long time. My heart health, my gut health, not that I've got hair, but I guess my beard is going to look pretty good, and I'll age without wrinkles. And for me, genetically, it makes a lot of sense because I've got certain genes that say I do better on a high protein diet. So I can eat a lot of protein, but you might have that polymorphism in the OTC gene. And the only way to know is to get your urea checked. But you could have kidney problems there that could balance itself out over time once you start optimizing your whole diet and lifestyle, but that mightn't be the case. And a long step in the right direction is to just get some collagen into you. I mean, it's an unsung hero. Gut health. Now, it is absolutely huge. I've got a couple of videos here from one of my clients, and he was making great progress. We did his DNA, we got him on point, but he wasn't getting the results as quickly as we anticipated. So basically, we kind of assumed that he would have bad gut health. And this is what the functional doctors identified.
And so, yeah, come on down a little bit more. See, so right here.
Okay, so it's the bacteria. Yep.
Right. So that's where he said, this is your problem area, right?
Right, the bacteria. Yep. So,
and then,
yeah.
Or go down further, right down there. Yeah. So you'll see, he's like, you're at these bottom levels. Like, this is like your immune, right? So that's where you talked about the immunity.
Yep.
Of my gut and everything. So he's saying, yeah, this stuff is all like, this is the problem.
The gut.
And
yep.
Yeah. So here's the bad news. Like this, yep. You have this problem. He says, but the good news is we've identified it now, and it is correctable. He said it will take several months to correct it. And so he said, but you're
several months to correct the gut. So there's a bit of a protocol to do that. And guess what a sick gut can cause?
Because of the insulin resistance that's created in your gut biome,
yep.
Metabolic stress and the inflammation that's created there. He says,
so as you can see there, a sick gut, that one thing alone can be an Achilles heel to all of it. Gut health is paramount. And they've also shown now that if you got the incorrect species of gut flora, it can reduce serum and brain testosterone levels by degrading testosterone. Really key. Have to have a healthy gut, but also liver. Now, big food, they use emulsifiers and chemicals and additives and preservatives, and it destroys your gut. Then guess what happens? You get irritable bowel disease and gut upsets, and then it leads to anxiety and depression-like behavior, comorbidities, neuroinflammation, chronic psychological stress, and then you got colitis. Then you got the HPA axis activated, which is more cortisol. You've got LPS translocation from the gut into the bloodstream. Then you've got pro-inflammatory cytokines, TNF-alpha, interleukin-1, interleukin-6. It's a mess. And then guess what happens? Well, you get into the medical system and you're prescribed big pharma drugs.
So I guess testosterone would be a very powerful lever to pull down on to get rid of inflammation when it's up at the right level.
Exactly. Yeah. In general, especially in the low back. That's why the drug companies hate it, right? Because if you have nice high testosterone, it's going to heal a lot of chronic issues that they're prescribing drugs for, like arthritis and gut issues, like IBS. They have all these drugs for irritable bowel syndrome.
Yeah.
It's just like on and on.
Testosterone's like a magic trick to bring down inflammation all over the body.
Exactly.
Yeah, so that's something you might know about. Testosterone is a pretty powerful at lowering inflammation all over the body, especially in the gut, the lower back. And it's like, you've got to keep it up at a certain level, and then it's going to have a profound effect at keeping inflammation at bay. And as you probably learned from the previous video, and as Dr. Ken Berry said,
all those things are symptoms of low testosterone. And there's a long list of prescription medications that you might be taking from your doctor, your doctor that you trust, that could actually be plummeting your testosterone levels. I've got a YouTube video about.
So here's a short list. Big pharma drugs, keeping your testosterone down. Also things like Tylenol, they can lower testosterone. That's paracetamol in Australia. So you eat the big food, then you get pathologies, and then big pharma comes to the rescue, keeps you down, you feel like shit. So it's not an ideal system. It might work for some, didn't work for me, but I'm interested in longevity, health, peak human performance. I've got big things to do, and I'm sure you do too. So we have to listen to these experts if we want to have an amazing life. Now, the mitochondria, they are a necessary step to make testosterone. They're the only place you can burn body fat, and they create the bulk of your ATP. So we need lots of vitamins and minerals, not too high, not too low. We've got to get in the butter zone. So the mitochondria here, basically LH comes in through the circulation to the testes, triggers this pathway here, then nitric oxide fires up, hits this star protein here, then it imports cholesterol into the mitochondria where you make testosterone. So how do we make brand new, powerful B8 mitochondria? I'm going to show you that on the next slide. And just to show you how important the mitochondria is for fat loss, this is Scott Stevenson, PhD.
You might end up making yourself a better fat oxidizer in this situation, especially when you're like a month out and your body's like, no, I want to break down protein. I don't want to use fat. Having more fat available, having more mitochondria there to oxidize fat could make you a better fat burner. And here's the thing about doing morning cardio.
Yes,
fasted cardio.
So more mitochondria, more fat loss, more testosterone, more energy. And that's the point. How do you make brand new mitochondria? This is Dr. Rhonda Patrick. And in healthy young people, 49% in 3 weeks, mitochondrial biogenesis. So how do we do that?
That is exercise. High-intensity interval training for 3 weeks increased mitochondrial capacity by 49% in younger people and 69% in the elderly.
3 weeks, HIIT training, 49%, and also 69% in older people. So think about it. You're starting to make this brand new mitochondria here, the V8 mitochondria, more testosterone, more fat loss, more energy. And you're moving away from these outdated 4-cylinder engines. It's like a fucking upgrade. So that is absolutely huge. However, if you don't have enough manganese to power up superoxide dismutase, then you've got a lot of oxidative stress. So maybe, just maybe, we need to think about this more intelligently by having adequate vitamin and mineral status. So you've got to really connect all of these pieces to get great results. And that's what we're doing here today. Now, do you want to drop body fat? Then we must sleep. This is Dr. Matthew Walker, neuroscientist, sleep researcher.
Not getting sufficient sleep, 70% of all the weight that you lose will come from lean muscle mass, and not fat.
Right. The body, when it's fatigued in that way, wants to hold on to those fat cells.
Exactly.
Right?
Your body becomes stingy in giving up its fat. So in other words, when you are underslept, but you're trying to watch your diet, watch what you eat, you will lose what you wanted to keep, which is muscle, and you will gain what you wanted to lose, which is fat. So sleep is important. According to Dr. Matthew Walker, and they've done this in clinical trials,
after just reading from his book there, Why We Sleep, after 10 days of just 7 hours sleep, the brain is as dysfunctional as it would be going without sleep for 24 hours. And they've actually mapped this out with brain tests. He went on to say that people think that they're not underslept, but they are underslept. So we need about 8 hours per day. And that's exactly what I get. I take this extraordinarily seriously. And all of these things here is what screws up your sleep. And I think based on the people that we've helped, insulin resistance is the biggest driver, because insulin resistance can increase blood pressure through several mechanisms. Increased renal sodium reabsorption, so your blood pressure goes up. And this is the worst one, the next one. Activation of the sympathetic nervous system. So that's stress. So cortisol goes up, stress hormones go up. So you wake up, you don't have deep sleep. And that's the problem. So you got two stress pathways. The fast pathway, boom, milliseconds. The brainstem releases a nerve impulse to the adrenals, top of the adrenals there in the kidneys, and boom, your heart rate increases, your blood pressure goes up, your liver converts the glycogen into glucose and dumps it into your bloodstream, then your insulin goes up, and then you wake up. And the reason you wake up is because the fast path triggers the slow path. What is the slow path? The HPA axis, cortisol. The interesting thing about cortisol, especially while you're trying to sleep, is that cortisol has a half-life of 15 minutes, which means it takes 30 minutes to metabolize all of that cortisol. And how does the body get rid of the metabolites of cortisol? Through pissing them out, urination. So you wake up to go to the toilet, and that's how it happens. And insulin resistance causes the activation of the sympathetic nervous system to push up stress hormones and cortisol. You metabolize them and you wake up to go to the toilet. And at the same time, you got blood pressure issues, and that's not a good thing, especially for testosterone. This is what we need to do to optimize all of your hormones, and it's linked to the sun. Professor Huberman's spoken about this so many times in all of his podcasts, and the scientific literature is thick with this. It's called precise circadian entrainment. It's pretty simple and it doesn't take a lot of time. So what we have to think about are the consequences first and foremost. So when you don't get the morning and afternoon sun and a little bit of UVB, this is what can show up in our life. Number one, acute impact on emotional responses. So fluctuations in mood, irritability, anxiety, loss of empathy, so we just don't give a shit, frustration, risk-taking, negative salience, so you got more negative thoughts than you wish to have. And then you've got your cognition. It tanks your cognitive performance, your memory consolidation, your attention, concentration, decision-making, communication, creativity, productivity. And then chronic long-term health consequences. You've got daytime sleepiness, microsleeps, cardiovascular disease, altered stress response, which isn't a good thing. You've also got infection, lowered immunity, cancer, metabolic abnormalities, diabetes, insulin resistance, and also depression and psychosis. So how do we start thinking about this? Well, that's healthy hormones, what you see on screen there. So I get up around about 5 a.m. and I go to sleep about 8:30, 9. That's me. That's mine. So you could get up at 7. You just got to make sure you get this right in your time period. So when you get the morning sun, and I'll talk about what the times in a moment, you got a healthy release of cortisol. So that's the gray line of cortisol coming up there. And it comes out for about the first 4 hours of the day. And then it tapers off, and that's healthy, comes up and it tapers off. And the remarkable thing about cortisol and DHEA, which is the androgen there, it has the same precursor, ACTH. ACTH is released in a pulsatile manner 40 times a day. So you've got an opportunity to optimize cortisol and DHEA and other hormones. So as you can see there, what the science is super clear on is if you go out and get 10 minutes of the morning sun when it's sunny, or say 20 to 30 when it's overcast, and there's something else you can do, and I'll show you on the next screen, it's going to optimize cortisol and DHEA and thyroid hormone. So the light hits the retina here, it goes down this pathway here, and it releases thyroid stimulating hormones. So your thyroid comes out to play. So it's doing all of that heavy lifting. And another thing it optimizes for is testosterone. So all of those hormones are being optimized. Now, what you can also do, and this is what I do in the winter and also on days that I don't get out of the sun, you can use what's called light therapy. And I've got more information about that below. Now, what you see on screen there was a 2016 randomized placebo-controlled study. And all they did was get people to use this light therapy here for 30-minute sessions, and in 2 weeks, it doubled their testosterone. Yes, it was lower testosterone, but nothing else changed. So let's just consider yours as 400 or 500. You know, I could go to 600 or 700 just with that one strategy alone, because it is that important, as you can see on screen there. It's optimizing all of those hormones, but we can do better. How can we do better? Well, when you wake up in the morning, cortisol, what it also does, and this is key to understand, it starts to release glycogen from the muscles and the liver and puts it into the bloodstream as glucose. So when glucose comes up, and if you're not metabolizing glucose and using it, guess what else comes up? Insulin comes up. So we've got to have a way to use that glucose efficiently. So what we want to think about is exercising in the early part of the day. Why? Let's have a look at what the scientific literature says. So when you exercise, you've got these transporters that open up, and they take the glucose from the blood and put it into the working muscle. So you're optimizing glucose, which means you're optimizing insulin, and that's very advantageous. So when you exercise, these transporters go up twofold, and when you exercise really hard, they go up a lot more than that. And guess what else? When you optimize thyroid hormone here, it also does the same thing. It optimizes the glucose transporters. And when you've got optimal testosterone, you can see here, this is insulin on the glucose transporters. So it's opening them up, but we don't want to push up insulin. We want to push up testosterone and thyroid hormone to do that, and also exercise. So as you can see here, testosterone significantly, when you optimize testosterone, increases those transporters to get the glucose out of the blood and use it. So just to show you here, if you exercise for just say 10 or 15 minutes in the early part of the day, you don't have to do a big bout. It's just going to optimize all of those functions, namely glucose and insulin. So here, 10:30 in the morning, a 45-minute bout, your glucose levels is about here. Later in the day at 4:30, your average glucose was a bit high, which isn't good because your insulin is up a bit higher. But if you do 3 15-minute sessions, it's just a little bit lower there. So that's the average glucose. And the lower your glucose, the lower your insulin. And they've also shown right here that if you 4,000 steps per day, your average testosterone is about there, and 12,000 steps, it's a bit higher. So the more steps you do, the more testosterone you've got, right? So it's all about exercise. And for me, it's a no-brainer. If you do 10 to 15 minutes of exercise in the early part of the day when you wake up, you're optimizing for glucose and insulin, which means you're optimizing for all of the V8 hormones. So that is absolutely key to understand. Now, what about carbohydrates? How many carbohydrates do you need? Well, this is where we're all uniquely different. On screen there, that's one person's glucose genes. So they've got a big risk. They can't really eat a lot of glucose, carbohydrates, until they optimize their whole life, their food, their exercise, the sun, the liver, all the blood markers, vitamin and mineral status. But this person here can eat a lot of carbohydrates. Do you see the difference there? So the only way to know definitively is by checking with a blood glucose test. You can do that with a pinprick, and that's what I usually do. Or you can use what's called a constant glucose monitor. This is Dr. J just speaking to that.
This gene.
Yep.
Noticeable impact, and monitor the blood sugar too, because number one, super important for the brain, but number two, she has a lot of diabetes genes. So it's going to be a really important, it's going to be a challenge.
Yeah.
Important focus and a challenge.
Constant glucose monitor do you recommend, so I can give these guys a bit of a heads up?
Yeah, I like the NutriSense company.
NutriSense.
Right. Yeah, you don't have to get a prescription from a doctor to get that one. And they use what's called a Freestyle Libre, Livre. The other one that's really good is called Dexcom, but the Dexcom is really expensive.
Right.
So the NutriSense, which uses Freestyle Libre, is the best company that I know of.
Right. Excellent.
So as you can see there, if you're serious about it, you'll need to check your blood glucose and make sure it's at the right level. I've got more information about that below. And if you want to go super advanced, you can get a constant glucose monitor. Now let's explore the only things you can do with glucose. So number one, you can use it for energy, but remember, if you don't have a lot of magnesium, you can't really use it, can you? And I also showed you at the beginning of this, if you don't have enough magnesium, you have insulin resistance. So your blood sugar will be up. So that's why we need optimal vitamin and mineral status. Now, the second thing you can do with it is you can use it to build muscle and to fuel the muscle, or unfortunately for a lot of people, you can use it to build the fat. And that's not what we want to do. So that's what can happen. And the third and final thing that we can do is park it as glycogen in the muscle and the liver. So the more muscle you carry, the more carbohydrates you can eat. So that's why it's really good to do weightlifting. Now, another thing that I spoke about in the previous video there, and this is a very significant study, and this was done with people with pre-diabetes. And if you recall from the previous video, the difference between standard labs versus optimal labs is what you see on screen there. A standard lab will say between 2.6 and 24.9 for fasting insulin is okay. No. But functional medicine says between 2 and 5. You see the big juxtaposition there? Now, we see it over and over again. Once it gets below 8, your fasting insulin, it's pretty clear sailing. You're going to be doing pretty good. So that's what we've discovered as we've worked with a lot of people. Now, this study was done with pre-diabetics, and they had no clue. And that's insulin resistance, and their fasting insulin was about 22. Now, all they did was change the order in which they ate their foods. So they did 3 tests. Test number 1, carbohydrates first, then protein and veg in the yellow line there. So you see a big spike in glucose and a big spike in insulin. Remember, this is with people with insulin resistance. The next test, they did protein and veg together, then they did carbohydrates. So in the blue line there, pretty stable blood glucose, but the insulin was up still a little bit too high. The next part of the test was vegetables first, which coats the gut with a fibrous mesh, which slows down the absorption of the glucose, the carbohydrates into the bloodstream, then the protein, then the carbs, and look at the green line, much less insulin. So the less insulin you produce day in, day out, you're going to get insulin sensitivity back faster. So let's just wrap this one up. If you get the morning and afternoon sun, you're going to optimize your hormones. If you do a bit of exercise in the early part of the day, you're going to further augment and optimize glucose and insulin to set yourself up for success and great sleep. And where are we? if you make sure you're doing at least, probably 8 to 12,000 steps, you're going to have more testosterone as well. And just the final nail on the coffin here, exercise as medicine, evidence for prescribing exercise as therapy in 26 different chronic diseases, psychiatric diseases, neurological diseases, metabolic diseases, cardiovascular disease, cystic fibrosis, and cancer. So another thing that's super powerful is to understand your genetics. And if you want any more information about that, drop a comment below. But food sensitivities can cause inflammation and cortisol to go up and cause a lot of insulin resistance if you don't know what foods you are sensitive to. So we've done a lot of genetic testing with a lot of people over the years, over 160 now, and we see this at about 60%, which is lectin sensitivity. And this is what Dr. J has to say about this gene in particular.
The lectin is the big one. That's a 4-fold higher risk of heart disease, even as a plus minus, the SELE.
Yeah, that's huge. Yeah.
Yeah. So lectins are going to trigger a lot of damage to the arteries and damage to the gut. I would recommend avoiding grains.
Yeah.
Grains are the major source of lectins.
Yeah.
And his gut's very sensitive to grains also, with the gluten. And he's got a thyroid gene that comes up later with gluten as well. So I would say just take off the grains,
All right there. So food sensitivities is pretty huge. And not everybody's sensitive to this, but it's really advantageous to know what you are sensitive to, because it can cause a lot of inflammation and oxidative stress and an increase in cortisol, which brings all the V8 hormones down and eventually drives those pathologies, including insulin resistance. Another big one is nightshades and gluten. And we see a lot of people that have sensitivity to gluten, at least 80% of the people. And you've got things like organophosphates, oxalates, tannins, things like that. So once you understand your food sensitivities, you can take these Trojans off the table and you're a long step in the right direction. Let's talk about how to put this together, when to eat, why we should fast, who should fast, things like that. So not everybody needs to fast, but it is a good idea to do a little bit of fasting, because one thing that it does do that I learned from Dr. J is it helps your gut heal. So if you've got a sick gut, fasting is advantageous. And another reason fasting is advantageous is simply that it triggers a process called autophagy, which is like a scanner. This Japanese researcher won the Nobel Prize for his work on autophagy way back in 2016, because it's a pretty big deal. It's a natural detox of the body. So more than likely, you'd know a little bit about fasting and autophagy, so I won't drive into that. Now, basically, my genetics requires that I get a lot more B vitamins, choline, vitamin D, vitamin C, vitamin E, and K2, much more than the RDI. In some cases, significantly more than the RDI. Now, I won't give you those, because if you try and follow what I'm doing, as we have now learned, too much of a good thing is a bad thing. So we want to get our unique genetics into the butter zone there. We don't want the vitamin and mineral status to be too high, and we don't want it to be too low. We want the butter zone there. It takes a little bit of time to work out. Blood panels, DNA are the easiest way to work that out. So when you get a blood panel, you go, well, this needs fixing. Then you work out, how do I fix this blood marker? So on and so forth. And as we now know, the current system tells us to eat these foods. And as we learned from Dr. Ken Berry, it's kind of a slave diet. You feel full, right? But you don't have a lot of energy. You don't have a lot of testosterone. And that's kind of by design. They want us to be slaves working in the system. Well, that's what I think. That's my experience. And they tell us not to eat a lot of these very high nutrient-dense superfoods. So I'll just leave that there. Now, also, we've also learned the previous video that these, let me just go back here, these genes and these genes means that I genetically need to do a lot of fasting. So with that said, that is how I put it together. It's a busy screen. Let me walk you through it. So I get up at 7 o'clock, so 5 o'clock in the morning here, and I go to bed at about 8:30. to 9 p.m. And that's because I've got precise circadian entrainment. So the sun triggers me to wake up at a certain time and to fall asleep at a certain time. That's the natural rhythm of the body. So I get up at about 5 o'clock, and a lot of times, but not always, I'll fast all the way to 2 p.m. Sometimes 10 or 11 a.m. I'll break my fast. It just depends on what I'm trying to do. So this, what you see on screen there, is more geared towards burning fat and putting on a bit of muscle. So it's what I call burn and build. So the first meal at 2 o'clock is a very large, heavy protein meal with a nice amount of good, healthy fats. And the reason I do that, I taper my protein down and then I increase my carbohydrates, and that works beautifully for me. When you get a lot of protein, the body senses that protein is super important, so it slows down gastric emptying. So it's just trickling into the system. So the first meal of the day, again, is quite large, a lot of protein and a nice amount of healthy fats there. Then the second meal of the day is at about 4:30. Now, what I do there is taper down significantly the protein, but I increase the carbohydrates, and I use specific carbohydrates that suited to my genetics and a bit of fruit on the second meal. The third meal of the day is, again, smaller in protein. This is the first time I introduce vegetables into my body, and I don't eat a lot of vegetables. And I'll also have a smaller protein meal, and I'll also have a nice amount of carbs. So that's how I do it. That's my unique genetics. Now, right here, what we have to do, and you only need to do this for a couple of weeks, maybe 3, is you get an app called Chronometer, and you start tracking your vitamin and mineral status. So when you enter your foods, it will track your B vitamins, it'll check your E, your C, your minerals. So you can see the point that I'm trying to illustrate here. Very simply, you'll know exactly where you have lack in your body, and you'll know what to eat to fill in the void. In some cases, you might need to supplement, as it is for me. I don't supplement a lot, but I do supplement a few B vitamins, vitamin D. Now, you'll get to a place that I call plate design. So what I do, we'll just go back here. I've got about 10 meals there that are plate 1, so big protein meal, and I know exactly how many vitamins and minerals are in that meal. 10 meals that I know. Then 10 more meals with meal 2. So I know exactly what meal 2 looks like, and I can select a plate that I've pre-designed so I know exactly how many vitamins and minerals I'm getting. Then again, the same is true with meal 3. I have 10 plate designs that I know, and I'll just show you what I mean here. So you can see these are the plate designs. I've taken pictures of them. I know what they look like. I know what's in them, and they're just locked into my subconscious mind, so I can just go out and eat like that without needing to count calories. And I haven't counted calories in a very long time, and that's where I am. So you'll intuitively get to that place, but it takes a bit of time to figure that out. So you're not going to get there all at once. And the necessary step, and I know not a lot of you don't want to hear this, is to track your calories, then do plate design and know exactly that meal 1 will hit these vitamins and minerals, meal 2 and meal 3. And then what you need to supplement to fill in the lack, then you supplement those vitamins and minerals. So it is pretty much that simple. Now, I'll come back to this point here. So this is the aromatase accelerator. So there's 17 there. I'll come back to that. This is what's called the Matador. And this is going to accelerate, when everything else is dialed in, your blood work, your vitamin and mineral status, it's all dialed in. This is going to be a powerhouse. So what this is a clinical trial, and they've replicated this a few times now. 2 groups of people over 16 weeks. Group 1 was in continuous energy restriction. The other group was in intermittent energy restriction, and I'll explain exactly how that works very shortly. The important distinction is 1 was harder and 1 was easier, and we want the easy. So after 2 weeks, their weight loss diverged. So in constant energy restriction, they still lost a decent amount of weight, just over 10 kilos there. And they were eating less calories than the intermittent energy restriction, who ate more calories. And they lost about 15 kgs. So that's pretty significant. Now, what do you think? Why do you think that is? Well, a couple of reasons. The people that are eating more calories, they got more nutrients. That's number one. And number two, your V8 hormones, they stay in the up position. And that's what they've shown also. So if you're in constant energy restriction, what happens to your thyroid? Well, as you can see here, a low-calorie diet brings down your thyroid after about 2 weeks. And then you're not getting as many vitamins and minerals. And when thyroid comes down, testosterone comes down, because as far as your body's concerned, you are in constant energy restriction. So it's going to do everything that it can to stretch it out. And you feel tired and you don't feel like going to the gym. You don't have the energy. So that makes perfect sense why it makes sense to have intermittent energy restriction. So the way that you work this out, we'll do this online together. So we'll go here, and this is the calculator, and it'll be linked below. So let me just, this calculator here. So let's just say that you're male and you're 52 and you're 170 centimeters and you're about, I don't know, let's say about 78 kgs, and you've got a pretty active lifestyle there, and you hit calculate. So what it's going to work out for you is your maintenance calories. So you can see that at that weight, you're about 2,700 calories at maintenance. And then to drop weight fast, about 1,600 calories. So very simply, for 2 weeks, you eat around about maintenance calories. And for 2 weeks, you eat well under maintenance calories. And that's just going to accelerate the fat loss, but also and critically keep your V8 hormones in the up position. I don't use that. I use a different strategy. And there's multiple ways that you can think about this and use this. And we've used several different strategies to do it, but this one has been shown in clinical trials. And this is probably your best bet moving forward. So you can also do 1 week and 1 week at maintenance and 1 week below maintenance. And there's a lot of other ways you can do it. If you want any more information about that, let me know. But as you can see now, that's going to tie in to tracking your calories. And that's what the chronometer will do for you. But more importantly and precisely, it will track your micronutrients, your vitamin and mineral status, and show you where you're lacking, what you actually need to supplement. Now, this is one of my clients that started tracking, and this is what happened. Yeah.
So anyway, that's just what that says. Okay. So I'm down, what is that, like 11, 12 pounds, something in 2 weeks. Okay.
Excellent.
So that's what I'm down. This week, so starting, I think it was last Friday, right? So I have the chronometer.
Yes.
And I shared that with you. So if you look at that, if you're able to access it,
yep,
every single thing I put in my body, it has been logged in there. So now we have the data. So here's something that I've noticed.
So you see that. So using the Matador and also tracking your calories, everything you put in your body, you know exactly what fuel your body's got. Then over 2 to 3 weeks, you can actually back off that and use plate design. Now, not all the people that we help use plate design because they like to have more control. But as you get more apt and used to doing it, most of my clients, they don't even count calories. They use plate design, and you can just see what's happening in the mirror. But what you'll find is when your V8 hormones are in the up position, the weight just comes off and the muscle goes on. And if you really start to dial in your genetics to know right here, when to fast, when not to fast, and also if you want to pack on a bit more muscle, you have a bigger feeding window, that's when you're going to really accelerate fat loss and keeping it off permanently. So even if you've got bad genetics like me with these adiponectin genes and these fat transfer obesity genes, you are not destined to be large. And it's not difficult. It just takes time. And the time it takes really depends on where you are now. What's your health like? Are you kind of overweight now? How are you feeling? Where's your testosterone? Where's your homocysteine? Where's your blood labs? Once you dial in your blood labs and you start eating like this to your genetics, you know what foods harm you and you also know what foods heal you. Can you see how easy this might become? You know, it's not supposed to be complicated, but it takes a bit of time to dial in. So it's going to get harder before it becomes easier. And not a lot of people want to hear that, but that is the reality. You've got to track this, do your blood work, and find out what foods harm and heal you. Then you're a long step in the right direction. So just to wrap up what we've covered, the Matador, that's a great strategy to use. And knowing your genetics, knowing when you're going to eat, what foods to eat, and then you also tie into that the fact that if you eat your foods in a certain order, it can significantly lower blood glucose and insulin levels. And again, if you exercise, you dial in the morning and afternoon sun because the circadian rhythm is pretty important. Then you're making sure that you've got great sleep. You're also doing everything you can to boost the mitochondria, which are a necessary step to make testosterone, fat loss, energy production. Once you're dialing all of that in, what's going to stop you? What can possibly stop you? Once you've only have to do this once. And sure, it can take a bit of time to dial in. Some of our clients take 6, 9, and 12 months to be fully optimized, but generally they're older gentlemen and they've had a lot of weight to lose as well. So it just depends where you are. So if you got any questions, drop them in the comments below. So that really is all that you need to think about when it comes to accelerated fat loss. Number 1, phase 1, androgens in the up position, the VA hormones. Number 2, the boosters here. Mindset is huge too. And you can use advanced supplements. I don't. I just choose to supplement the key metabolites that my body makes less of as I age, and I just fill in the void there. If you take the Trojans off the table, you increase your mitochondria, you get your omega index optimized, then you get the morning and afternoon sun. You also have really good sleep, great liver and gut health, so great blood labs. Beautiful. You know, you're a long step in the right direction. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. I think it's going to be close to 2 hours, probably, maybe an hour and 3/4. And I thought it was going to take an hour, but I wanted to be very comprehensive in this. And I know I've thrown a lot of information in there and you'll probably have questions. So feel free to either reach out to me or drop a comment below because you can do this. You can get the body that you want.